My name's Craig Butler, the General Manager of Lithgow City Council, and it gives me great pleasure to provide some context to this information material that you'll be viewing today. I start, however, by acknowledging that I deliver this presentation from the land of the Wiradjuri people, the traditional owners of this land, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Just by way of introduction to those that I haven't met, as I deliver this presentation, I look back on 44 years of local government. My trade has always been plied in cities like Lithgow that flick between today or the here and the now and the future. Dominantly, those have been cities in Western Sydney, where there's been high growth in the infrastructure and investment, job opportunities, and other services haven't kept pace with that growth. And it's quite appropriate that I find myself in Lithgow confronted with those same challenges and opportunities. This is the most wondrous place, but it occupies one foot in today and it needs to delicately move its foot into the future. And I think that's really the role that Lithgow Council is looking to position itself into and play, to really ready this city for the future, but at the same time to continue to deliver services to the quality that you expect today. I'm really taken with the term that we're using for this project, Our Place, Our Future. And I'm taken by that because I think what it does is it places the people first and foremost. And rest assured, Lithgow Council has our people's interest at heart first and foremost. And I'll keep returning to that theme. But I'll also return to the theme of how this program, Our Place, Our Future, the options we're speaking about, the initiatives that could be funded out of this program can assist not only in delivering those services that the community wants so much today, but also position the city and ready it for the future. So let me get into this presentation. I've now been here for 2 years. I've taken that time, the first 12 months in particular, to really understand this place, to understand the people, their wants and needs and their circumstances. I've looked at socioeconomic circumstances, employment statistics, and the like. I've also studied the geography of this place, and it's a wondrous geography, but it's complex to run public infrastructure across. The other thing I've studied is how ready this place is for the future. And look, it is without doubt that this city needs to transition into the future. The things that have kept us strong and resilient in the past cannot be assured into the future, and that's a strong theme. But to assist me with these studies, what I had done was a deep forensic analysis of our financial situation. Why finances? Because the finances allude to our capacity. If we have sufficient financial capacity, we can deliver those services today. We can also plan and ready ourselves for the future. We did this in quite a methodical way. The first thing that we did was looked at our underlying financial position at the existing levels of service. And I'll move to a slide shortly that speaks to what that position is. In short, we've had sustained periods of deficits where, for a whole range of reasons, some of our doing, but many not of our doing, the cost of running this city has exceeded the revenue or our financial capacity. So we've had a sustained period of deficits. So from this first step, this first piece of work, we knew how much it cost to run this city with its 4,000 square kilometres of land area, and it's more than 900 kilometres of roads. When we identified what that gap was, we then looked at step 2. What productivities are there? What savings? What other opportunities are there to raise revenues? With that identified, we deducted those savings, revenues and productivities off that gap. We then apportioned the gap, and the gap to cut to the nub of this, or to cut to the answer, the gap is $6 million. We apportioned that $6 million in step 3 across the various rating categories. Step 4 is really that future positioning piece. And that's the domain where we looked at what does it require to move a city into the future? Where can we be as productive? What new agendas are there? How much does it cost to transition an economy? And then step 5 goes to what's out on exhibition at the moment, the recommendations for implementation. Where would money be directed? What is the gap? And who would pay? This slide looks back and it looks at our operating result over the past 10 years. And I draw your attention to the bottom row, which records 10 years of deficits. And I leave it to you to calculate what the cumulative impact of those deficits has been over that period. And I relate this to my own personal circumstances, and perhaps you can also. In your own household, I think you'll realise that it's perilous if for a sustained period of time you are spending more than you're earning or is coming into your household. Not only did we look back, but we looked forward, and we extrapolated out over a period into the future. What would be our operating result, our financial operating result, if nothing changed? And again, I draw your attention to the fact that if nothing changes, Lithgow City Council will experience sustained deficits into the future. I was recently at the National General Assembly of Local Government in Canberra over 2.5 days. And there were 2 continuous themes presented by all range of experts inside and outside of local government, many outside in fact. And what was repeated again and again and again is that financial sustainability is the number 1 risk to councils. This slide speaks to that issue. It draws from research where there was extensive surveying undertaken of CEOs and general managers from across Australia, and it tracks the high risk issues for local government over the last 4 years. And I draw your attention again to financial sustainability as being the number 1 challenge. I spoke earlier about how much does it cost to run this city and how does that compare to our revenues or our financial capacity. So Lithgow Council is included in a group 4 of councils. So the state government clusters councils based upon a whole range of factors. Lithgow is in group 4. We looked at group 4 for the purpose of comparison. We looked at their circumstances. We looked at whether they were comparable and therefore could we draw from them to see how much rating revenue they source and whether that was a measure of what Lithgow might require. But when we looked at those, you had councils that are up into the 70,000 people through to 16,000. We looked at their circumstances. You had the likes of Orange, Wagga, Tamworth and the like. So large cities, probably around the 65, 70,000, big economies, big commercial centres, industry and opportunity. So we didn't think that was very comparable. We then looked at other councils to see where were the comparable councils to benchmark ourselves against. And we landed on 3 in particular: Singleton, Midwestern, being Mudgee, and Muswellbrook. Why are they comparable? They have a population similar to Lithgow. They're not at the centre of their economic region. They're always off to the side. There's always a more significant, dominant regional centre, economic powerhouse. They're just on the edge of those. They have proximity to urban areas, such as the Hunter in the case of Muswellbrook and Singleton, and in our case, the Blue Mountains in Western Sydney. But interestingly, they also adjoin and run into the World Heritage Area. Why is that relevant? Because they have a geography with long valleys running up into World Heritage areas, a dispersed population up in those, and therefore the imperative to deliver long lineal lengths of road to service few people. Their economies are also very strongly related to the resources industry, of course, coal mining being the common element there. And they have shared challenges and opportunities. Of course, we hope that coal mining and thermal power generation in our case runs a long time, but we know that we need to plan for a future where they will be less significant within our city and indeed within Midwest and Regional Council, Muswellbrook and Singleton councils. So we are very comfortable that these councils are comparable and the cost of running those cities is comparable to Lithgow. So what did that comparison show? And the slide's on your screen here. If I summarise this, I draw your attention to the first table. And when I look at this, I always look at the population versus the rating income sourced annually. But I think it's also interesting to look at the distance of road length. Why? Because roads are our most significant and costly asset. And I'll return to that later. So I draw your attention to this top table. And indeed, I've also reinforced the finding of this table by speaking to other general managers and CEOs of councils throughout the Central West. And I've arrived at an indice which is that by and large, these councils, to be resilient, to deliver a broad range of services, and to deal with their challenges of transitioning their economy, require no less than $1 million per 1,000 head of population. That seems to me to be the equation, and it seems to be proven by this table here. So I then draw your attention to Lithgow City Council's rating revenue by comparison to its population. And I leave it to you to do the similar comparison. Compare Lithgow's rating income to population and the lineal distance of roads to be maintained. Compare that to the other three councils. So just to recap where I'm at, we determined a cohort of councils, 3 other councils that were very comparable to Lithgow's. They gave us an indication of how much it costs to run a city, at least $1 million per 1,000 head of population. We then looked at options to close that gap. So what is the gap? If I applied that measure at $13.5 million annually today in a population of 22,000, by my calculation, that gap is about $8.5 million. We looked at options to reduce that gap, and in 21-22, we held back on filling of vacancies and non-essential positions, but you can only do that for so long. But during the course of last year, we saved $1 million. We also recognise and we're active in the space of advocating to other levels of government for a fairer share of the income tax pie. And by way of example, public funds are sourced through taxation by the Australian government substantially, though there are certainly also state revenues, but substantially most taxes are taken by the Australian government. In a previous era, local government received, this slide talks to 2%, but I know in my time it's certainly been 1% of Commonwealth tax revenue, and yet that has fallen to 0.55% today. We also looked at how we could rationalise our operations or indeed other productivity savings, and this slide also speaks to this. So what I'm saying is that we identified a notional gap of around $8.5 million. We overlaid productivities and other savings. We continue to advocate for more significant investments from other levels of government back into local government generally, and we've identified employment cost savings. But we realised that we still had a gap, and I'll move to that now. I recognise there's a bit of detail on this slide, but I do encourage you to pause and just analyse or think about some of the data. Again, it reinforces the gap that Lithgow Council has in its annual rates revenue per head of population by comparison to these other 3 councils. I find it interesting also though to look at where those rates are sourced from, and I will leave it to you to form your opinions there. This slide indicates the average residential rates, farmland, business, and other such rates by comparison again to those three councils. And I leave it again to you to compare your circumstances for your category, whether you're a farmer or a resident in a village or Lithgow. I spoke earlier about positioning the city for the future. So this program has two components. How do we provide the services, the much needed services and appreciated services across this broad community within our financial capacity? How do we grow that capacity? But how do we position ourselves for the future? How do we ensure that we're as productive as possible? How do we ensure that we're able to fund and ready the city for economic transition? So to speak to this slide at the top, you have the identified gap. The deep analysis showed us that we require $6 million additional in revenues to provide services to this city. We set a target then of $1.3 million. So we said that we're going to be more productive and we're going to improve to the extent of a saving of $1.3 million. That left $4.7 million as the gap. We then added 4 components. 1 for additional strategic capacity, 1 for capacity building, this being similar to the example I spoke of earlier, a virtuous fund where ideas, innovation, the uptake of new technology, different ways of doing business could be funded out of this small pool of $250,000 for the purpose of generating other efficiencies. We set a small surplus, an annual surplus of $250,000 going forward by comparison to the sustained deficits, and we budgeted on or provisioned for $500,000 annually for economic transitions management. So when you compare the 4.7 or add the $4.7 million with those 3 tranches of specialised work and the $250,000 surplus, you return to a $6 million identified increase being required. So again, recap where this information package is up to as you view this slide here. Through deep analysis and accurate comparison against other councils and having already accounted for productivity and savings, we have an identified gap of $6 million. The choices are increase the revenue or reduce services. And these are the options that are spelled out in the next section of this information package. And I speak to the first here of what can be achieved if we increase the revenues. We recently surveyed the community, and overwhelmingly you told us that your priorities were to position this city's economy for the future with a diverse range of jobs, but also to maintain our infrastructure better, and in particular our roads. And this proposal speaks significantly to both of those priorities. I am profoundly concerned, especially after years of disaster, about the deficit or the backlog situation with our roads. I acknowledge that they are littered with potholes and damage, and that is bad enough. But my great concern is that the underlying damage is much more significant. And unless we intervene and can direct significant more additional resources, I am seriously concerned about the gap broadening and the legacy issue becoming even larger than what we see on the surface of a road. So this option allows us to deal with that challenge. It also, as I spoke earlier, allows us to deal with economic diversification. And I might just speak to that for a moment. $500,000. I hear you saying, well, that seems a lot of money. Again, we've looked at research. The Grattan Institute recently released a major report which spoke about the cost and complexity of diversifying a city's economy. and there is extensive research that reinforces that finding. I recognise that predominantly this information package will be viewed by residents, the ordinary person in the street, if I can use that term. And this slide speaks to what will be the impact under option 1 for a resident in this city. And that average is 26.5%. However, the total rate pool, remembering that we start at 13.5 and we've got a gap of $6 million, so the total rate pool will grow by 44.5%. But I do recognise that even the 26% that we've attributed to residential properties is a large burden. And so we, council, had considerable regard for how the financial load is distributed. We had particular regard for the capacity to pay. We had particular regard for the significant proportion of our population who are pensioners with the least ability to pay. And this slide speaks to all of that. So while the total rate pool is increasing 44.5%, we've been able to reduce the impact on residents to 26.5%. I spoke earlier about the comparisons that we did to those other 3 cities. Well, what we also did is we compared the rates that were being paid by certain industries within those cities. And what we found was that by comparison, it appeared prima facie that there was a capacity to pay more within particular sectors. So for the purpose of the consultation that we are having a discussion with mining, power generation and quarrying companies in terms of, is there a capacity to pay more? Another measure that this slide speaks to is the second bottom bullet point, where council is exhibiting an increase to the pensioner rebate of 20%, taking that from $250 to $300. And of course, council also has hardship provisions, so that if people are under duress, we're able to enter into payment plans or other arrangements. Option 2 is the other side of the coin. $6 million gap, it's what it costs to run this city today and to equip it for the future. Increase revenues in option 1, decrease services in option 2. And we want to have a deeper, serious and an open conversation with the community. If council does not favour option 1 at the end of the consultation, then it is option 2 that must be contemplated. And under option 2, we will need to present in subsequent years a plan that prioritises essential services and offers a range of other services that will be reduced. And I must be honest and say that I expect that services will need to continue to be reduced because of an increasing legacy, because of an increasing imperative to fund significant damage to roads and other critical infrastructure. This slide demonstrates the financial cost of option 2 within your rates. This slide demonstrates the process. We are now in an extensive period of consultation with the community. We are holding numerous town hall meetings, drop-in sessions. We're active in social media and on our own council website. We're engaging with the community. We're wanting to hear your opinion. The technical papers, the foundational information that underpins these policies or these different options is all available, and I encourage you to read it. I encourage you to participate in the process. I encourage you to come to the drop-in sessions and the town hall meetings. We want to explain the facts, but we also want to listen to your perspective. At the end, and only at the end of all of that process, including an extensive telephone survey, a cross-section of residents, will the council take a decision. I must emphasise the council has not taken any decision in support of either option 1 or option 2. That decision will not be taken until much later in this year. What happens if council does take a decision to increase rates? Well, there's a process there again, and ultimately that will express itself as an application to the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal, and they will review council's application for increased rates, and they will make a report to government about that. And it will be in 2023, around May, that council will receive formal notification of the decision on its application. This slide speaks to the various opportunities that are available for residents to participate in this process. And I return to the theme that we are using for this exercise: our place, our future. I encourage you to become involved. Council's not prepared this information package for the purpose of persuading you to a particular view, option 1, option 2, or something else. We've prepared it to give you the facts and the information from which you can make an informed decision. I do recognise this is an uncomfortable time. There's great uncertainty. There are great challenges with cost of living. But I firmly believe that this city, the people, deserve to have the best services. They deserve to have the best future. They deserve to be the best they can be. I encourage you to join the conversation, to participate in this process, and to influence the outcome. Thank you.